Hi everyone. Thanks so much for the invitation to share my work and my research with you today. My name is Tracy Hill. I'm a visual artist and a research associate for Art Lab Contemporary Print Studios based in Preston in Lancashire. But today I'm talking to you from a very hot and humid Bristol. So I apologise if there's a little bit of sound from the traffic. I'm quite close to a little road here. Trying to make sure the PowerPoint works. Okay, so really for me, my art has always been a tool to help me understand what I see and what I feel. So generally I work across printmaking, drawing and illustration, exploring this kind of dynamic relationship between the traditions of the handmade and the potential that new technologies and digital tools can offer. And increasingly my projects work across all of those mediums in the last few years. So my motivation behind my most recent project has been to rethink a perception of how we encounter and connect with our rural spaces through walking, particularly, especially kind of post-industrial spaces which sit on the edges of our everyday communities. So developments in digital technology really excites me. You know, this kind of idea of the extension to our own visual capabilities that it can offer really inspires me and often inspires a lot of my imagery. However, our increasing detachment from and mistrust of our own perceptions really concerns me, all kind of rolled up into one really. And walking is central to all of my projects. So a lot of the places I walk are actually fragments of land which now sits on the edges of these towns and cities that I live around. And I'm interested in communicating a human response to being in these spaces, really offering little glimpses of kind of mostly forgotten ways of living with the land. I think we have quite a unique wetland landscape here in the Northwest, which carries with it a history of misunderstanding and misuse. But because it's kind of a leftover space, it's possible to reinvent and reimagine it, which is what I love about it. And these spaces are as much my studio as my actual studio. So they're my thinking spaces, they're my collecting spaces. They're full of moments that you don't always anticipate, but will nevertheless shift the way you think or you see something. And the introduction of digital mapping technology and digital tools as a way to capture my walking journeys really began as a way to think about a view beyond my own visual capability. But really more than that, it challenged, you know, I was interested in challenging the technology to try and capture something which wasn't static, to kind of remap or even unmap actually spaces that have been deliberately marginalized in order to increase their invisibility. So when combined with a drawing or a printed surface, these digital kind of images, these files result in a reimagined space where you've got kind of a linking of technical and aesthetic, which then reveals something very personal and experience of a journey that I'd taken on foot. So for this presentation, I'm going to share with you some examples of a couple of projects and my artworks to give you a context to my practice, which will then lead to my most recent project, Porosity. So as an artist, I think there are quite specific elements which inform and shape my practice. Sitting on quite a firm foundation of traditional fine art, print and drawing are really key components of my practice. But two elements which I think I should highlight as quite fundamental are the roles of investigator and collaborator. And these roles have enabled the development of my artworks really throughout the years. I'm particularly interested in the relationship between, you know, I've said these digital and aesthetic worlds. So there's this space really where technology, where this kind of control meets our human experience. And as an artist, I don't really think of myself as working exclusively with one set of materials or processes. Although usually a lot of my work is produced with quite a strong sense of print. If you look at my work, you don't often recognize it as print in a traditional sense. So my choice of process and materials is always driven by the research, combining this kind of traditional mark making with non-traditional materials. And I've always been interested in exploring the potential of kind of a sensory, intuitive understanding of place and landscape. So I try and create images which are quite thought-provoking. They're you know, very true responses to encounters experienced when walking, which will then show a place's quite distinctive properties. And these exclusive characteristics have often been described as a place's thisness or a hexiety, which means the quality of a thing which would deem it unique. And I'm always searching for that thing that makes a place unique. And through my work, I'm attempting to create an experience of seeing and feeling, I suppose, to encourage discovery and understanding, and never to give a fixed perspective or a single viewpoint. I'm really not interested in that. So post-industrial wetlands have been, you know, a key focus of my work. They're complex, they're precarious, they're transient, they're unpredictable. They're spaces which have really reinvented themselves to accommodate the changing economic and urban world which surround them, but they've never completely surrendered to our occupation. So the importance of and protection and guardianship of these landscapes really doesn't get very much publicity. And through my art, I seek to challenge kind of this popularised perception of what Daniel Defoe described as the waste in his damning description of Chat Moss in 1726. And his description recorded this kind of whole vast area of mossland which stretched between Manchester and Lancashire. And his description set this kind of cultural misunderstanding which sadly still lasts to this present day. So my ambition really is to communicate kind of this forgotten possibility of a deeper and more intuitive connection with the earth beneath our feet. Try and change these ideas. Karen O'Rourke is a writer, and she believes that we begin by making sense of our surroundings so that we can actually go somewhere. And for me, kind of walking is this constant which enables this connection to place. So it's a complete immersion which leads to a much deeper understanding. So I'm never walking to think about escaping. It's to enable thinking, it's seeing, it's imagining. And Tim Ingold, who's a British anthropologist that probably lots of you know, he observes walking as a way of feeling, being and knowing. By making sense of the landscape around me, I aim to communicate this kind of precarious existence. So, you know, I'm opening up conversations. And in an era, I think, where the universal language is often reduced to kind of strings of code and data, especially with kind of mobile phones and digital apps, my work's trying to kind of offer a reconnection to that unique element, the physical experience, and understanding what it is to kind of be in a place and experience a place. So Matrix of Movement and Hexiety were two projects which I completed before the pandemic. They took quite a long time to be developed and to be completed. Probably both of them took about 8 years. And they investigated how developing technologies and personal encounters with post-industrial sites can kind of offer this new way of seeing and shift this understanding. And specifically in both of these projects, it was important that those sites that I was working on, they're now protected locations. So I was really interested in this, and they were specifically under the guardianship of agencies and wildlife trusts, and they wanted to find these new ways of talking about their landscapes. So I worked with them on this. And it was also kind of a really fundamental kind of intention as well, that through these projects I was thinking about ideas around kind of repositioning traditional fine art skills as well in this wider kind of collaborative practice. So using research collaboration and partnerships to kind of think about what it is to have a creative exchange, something that will drive a new innovation and a new discovery. So not necessarily working with other creatives, but people outside of my field. And my methods for collecting and processing imagery and data for these projects had been developed over a period of several years. Portable LiDAR scanners and digital mapping tools are now commonly used for the investigation of sites by surveyors, geographers, forensic science departments, and they've got this amazing capability of accurately recording and measuring the environment around them in absolute minute detail. And the actual equipment often doesn't look very different from a regular camera, to be honest. It's usually mounted on a tripod, although not always. There's often mirrors, infrared distance sensors, and an optical digital lens. And these machines have the ability to stream vast files of data while they do a 360-degree scan. Faro, the company who make the scanner that I sometimes use here in the UK, aptly compares the capturing process as being akin to touching or sensing space. And they say that the ethereal qualities such as tonal values, shades and colour interactions are systematically replaced by technology of precision mapping, surpassing what our human perception can achieve, which I think is really interesting, this kind of this suggestion that these machines are better than we are, that they can do things that we can't. So once the LiDAR data has been collected, I then deliberately deconstruct it. I manipulate and reconfigure the data and the imagery. And this is quite different, obviously, to the manufacturer's intended use. So in commercial and scientific terms, my kind of process of editing and reconstruction leaves that data completely useless. But I actually think it's a bonus. An academic and artist, Mike Phillips, suggests that such instruments open up new dimensions. As more dimensions are unveiled, more realities are modelled and more truths envisaged. And I think this kind of really sums it up. So resulting images take the form of either large immersive wall drawings or prints on paper. They're very much my reimagined vision. So I'm trying to get something that resonates with a subtle and rhythmic experience. My works are not meant to be a description of a view, but they're meant to offer a possibility to explore how we feel, a reimagining which goes beyond kind of a single static moment. So I'm trying to create this dialogue between memory and kind of a visual perception. Many of my images appear to be floating above an invisible horizon line. This was a very deliberate decision made to connect with the uncertainty felt when you're walking across a wetland. So it's drawing your attention to the seasonal and transitory elements of the landscape. All of these natural signifiers which help you navigate in a wetland environment when your normal lines of vision are removed. And you learn this very quickly for anybody that's been walking on a mossland. So reflecting on what Tim Ingold refers to as a permeable interface, my work really in these projects was exploring the point where kind of the land and the weather combine. So it's immersing us in this kind of whole multi-sensory response that then informs our knowledge and our memory. And then responding to this idea of place, my art really needed to be understood as kind of this very sensory experience, this memory of an experience when I was walking. And I think taking that actual process of taking the scan data out of the computer and recreating an etching or a drawing is really key to these works. And both of these projects created an opportunity to explore that idea about the image kind of going beyond a two-dimensional surface. So it was the point where one thing could possibly become another thing, and the edge between the physical world and how we feel when we're part of it. So I was increasingly interested in this. The project Texiety actually concluded with a 3-week residency in Warrington Museum and Art Gallery, where I produced a huge gallery drawing and some interactive panels. And these screen prints, these interactive screen prints, brought a whole new dimension to the gallery space, really, for me. So the images were taken from the scan data, and they were printed through silk screens in a traditional way. But instead of using normal inks, I used conductive inks. These are commercially available inks, and they contain fragments of conductive material. So when they dry, they allow the conduction of electricity. And the images printed with this ink then respond to this electrical current, in this case the human hand. So when you touch it, it conducts the electricity, triggering a sound recording to be played in the space. So I had great fun playing around with this idea of kind of the sonic experience being triggered by a very visual experience. And the speakers for these panels were set up in different parts of the museum as well, so the sound didn't always come from the place that you thought it would because you touched a panel, so it would be triggered somewhere behind you or in another part of the gallery. So I was really exploring how people kind of interacted with my artworks and how they moved around the museum as well. So perceptions of landscape, I believe, are, you know, really determined by our geographic place in the world. They're formed through historical, social and cultural context, and our experience of landscape is predominantly led by vision. So these are learned instincts, and for many of us, it's about seeking this desirable view. And then the restrictions of 2020 really created a need to reevaluate our terms of engagement with the world. So, you know, these physical spaces that we could explore became very much smaller, and our normal boundaries and time kind of lines were suspended. So new interactions then enabled a potential to explore places like we'd never explored them before. And just as lockdown hit, I was about to begin making a really new, quite large, ambitious piece of work, following from a residency in Western Australia the summer before. So I was meant to be making this big 10-metre continuous print using the print facilities at the university where I work. It would have taken weeks of printing, and crucially it needed access to these very specific pieces of equipment and lots of drying space. But then sadly COVID meant that everything changed that overnight, and I had no access to either the studios at the university or my personal studio in Preston. So I had to completely rethink how I was going to make my artwork, really. And at a time when our personal travel and movements were so heavily restricted, you know, they were almost just to the boundaries of our own homes, I decided to virtually rewalk the spaces I'd scanned the previous summer. So using the specialist software on my computer, which is linked to the scanners and the LiDAR that I use, it meant I could reconnect with the land and kind of re-navigate those spaces. And accidentally, in doing that, it also meant that I reconnected with the conversations that I'd had during those walks. So, unable to produce this kind of huge continuous piece of work, I decided to plan it in sections. And during lockdown, I produced 20 or so kind of square drawings. Each drawing was a map of the spot where I'd had a conversation, basically, or a conversation had occurred, and contact point kind of was born, really. And it's about people, it's about conversations and their connection to place, and it's very much about my discovery of a hidden history of place as well. So it's about rhythms and timescales and kind of all of those many layers of understanding that you need to start listening to and seeing landscapes properly. And then once back in my studio, I was able to kind of get a better understanding of what the work could be. So rather than becoming a large continuous print, each individual drawing became a unique piece. So I created monotypes, which is another form of printmaking. And these individual monotypes that were then designed to sit side by side. So it kind of revealed this flow between the panels, rather than it being a big continuous piece. And for me, that idea about the human touch and, you know, that contact point was really, really important for this piece. You know, it's humans trust touch, I think, gives them access to this reality, and it comes from a feeling that we are being active when we explore things through touch. So during lockdown, you know, this sense of exploring was completely removed. Touch was described as dampened. And much of the previous few years' work I'd done had been specifically about exploring place and connections to place, particularly through touch and our sensory perception. So in these senses which connect us to the outside world and give us a very particular perspective, So at this time, I found I resorted to the most touch sensory method of working, which was for me to draw. And I actually really enjoyed that freedom to work without the restriction of process and machinery. And I used that daily repetition of drawing to structure my day. And interestingly, the spaces in these final pieces of work actually became really, really important. And I think they're moments of quite a personal journey for me, these works, which, you know, the journeys themselves crossed continents, but it also recorded a moment in the world when everything paused and everybody began to listen to their bodies and to their walking again. So, you know, it's a piece of work that was of the moment, that was very particular to that moment in time. And I think increasingly I've been exploring how the human body, particularly when walking, can reveal these invisible traces connecting us. Supported by the Arts Council England, Porosity explored how traditional fine art practice, human beliefs and customs, and digital immersive technologies could combine to reveal unseen visual and unheard sonic traces in our everyday landscapes. So Porosity is my most recent project, and it's a term borrowed from geology, and it refers to the measure of holes in stone, or it's used to consider how water penetrates rock. So it was developed through 2020, through lockdown, and it's really a conversation, again, about relationships. Conversations to speak directly to the imperceptible energies which underscore human experience. So it's these kind of human experiences which kind of exceed our ability to capture or represent them as well. And it's a conversation with these kind of subterranean landscapes of Cheshire. So it's an invisible energy which shapes the very visible landscape around us. Implicitly, the term porosity also connects the permeability of the landscape with the porousness of our human body. So this points to a give and take relationship that I've been really interested in between person and place. The inevitable interchange kind of energies, which each leaving an impression on each other. So, you know, the landscape leaves an impression on us, we leave an impression on the landscape. And Letters to the Void was first a conversation. It became an ongoing exchange of ideas during lockdown, and finally it became a set of lithographic drawings and prints. So here, when I'm talking about Letters to the Void is really understood as a tension. It's a presence of an energy through an absence of something else. And initially, I was kind of really captivated by the forces kind of sitting under the northwest landscape. So kind of more than a century really of mining has left a massive void beneath Cheshire's surface. Salt mining and salt demand and commercial value has outweighed any concern really for the impact of mining and extraction on the landscape. And salt has got, you know, many properties which make it valuable, but critically it flows and it dissolves. So, you know, silently running beneath the surface of these brine streams, which are shaping our landscape in Cheshire. Subsidence hollows have historically been present as a result of brine extraction, and they continue to appear anywhere where water and salt connect. These invisible flowing energy lines, which are kind of carving out these ever-changing kind of hidden landscapes. And you can see the picture there in the slide for 2018, that big subsidence hole, right through the route of the proposed route for HS2. So that will be very interesting. Robert Macfarlane observes that only 5% of the universe's mass is made up of matter which we can touch with our hands or witness with our eyes and instruments. Energies which have a presence, refusing to interact with light, and which may not even exist. In his book Underland, he suggests that sometimes in the darkness you can see more clearly. And so really for me, during lockdown, my conversation began with this idea of the unseen. Initial research connected me with two women, specifically Deborah Bell, who's a friend, an artist, walker and a water dowser, and Dr. Rosalind Todd-Hunter, who's a walker, a cyclist and geologist. And during lockdown, our conversations revealed unique personal reflections. So connecting to unseen subterranean landscapes through walking. And each of us had quite a unique view and connection to these landscapes, each of us decoding through walking, observing and sensing. And these conversations directly focused and reshaped my thoughts, expanding the way I understood landscape and place through my walking body, really. Words connected ideas and thoughts. Words became a starting point for drawing. So this unseen landscape was mapped and revealed through body gesture and movement. Energies surround all human and non-human bodies as they move through the landscape, and each body is a receptor and potential decoder if we listen and learn to read the responses that our bodies give. So I really think that when we enter into a relationship with materials and movement, we then kind of allow ourselves to question what we think we already know about properties and the material properties that they hold. So key questions at the heart of this project as it developed were: what effects do unseen energy have on our sense of place? What happens to us as we move through a landscape? And how does the body decode the natural and man-made energies that surround us? And using a traditional lithography process, it was possible for me to use drawing on limestone to experiment with ways to articulate this idea of movement and frequencies. So these drawings were a way of suggesting feeling and material gesture to show unseen environmental energies. So water and touche were dropped onto ground lithographic stone. So touche is a very greasy black pigment which can be suspended in water. There's no right or wrong way to perform the gesture. Each drop, each sweeping arc produces a rhythm of grease and water on the stone. And then each line the touche traces is kind of a force of movement. So you're visualizing this kind of interconnection between material tensions, really. So, you know, by slowing down the rhythm of the movement, in and through the water, you are altering the concentration of the touche, and the grease in the water then creates its own gestures. So you have this kind of conflict between the human gesture and actually the materials overriding that and doing their own thing. And then as the water and the touche dry, the rhythms and the movement are captured on the stone surface. So this quote by Bergson proposes that movement is expressed as rhythm, and that all matter possesses its own rhythm, vibrating at frequencies above, below, and between the rhythms of our own consciousness. By allowing ourselves to think of the world around us as being animated by unseen forces, we are able to think of all material movements as active participants, extending our perceptions and understanding. Continuing with this kind of these drawings on stone, I used a process of erasure then and redrawing. So I was thinking about negative space, just like in the landscape, to kind of create this continued exchange between my hand and the material surface. So the process of drawing, I kind of thought of it very much like an excavation of an archaeologist. So at first this surface, the rhythms were quite evident, they were superficial. But then when you kind of start taking areas away or kind of creating space, you start to uncover a more subtle and kind of more fundamental flow between the marks. And in these drawings, kind of you have this unique signature and character of the stone, which carries the image as well. So the stone is combined with the day's environmental conditions. So both of these things are really key to capturing quite a unique trace and rhythm of that moment, of that day, of the air temperature, of the frequencies around it. And the relationship between drawing and the body and movement really took a hold and became the main focus of the project. So Finding Centre was a series of drawings which I created directly in response to a motion capture session that I did with Deb when she was dowsing. An artist, Amy Silman, describes drawing as an action verb, which I really love. So the action of making with a tool and with your body, moving in different directions almost simultaneously. So drawing kind of pulls something from something to something else. She talks about this multi-way relationship. So you've got, she talks about the substrate, the surface and the body as all being kind of in it together. And these drawings were made on paper. They have a dimension which corresponds to the size of my own body. So these are sections that you can see. The actual image is much larger, actually life size. And I used graphite to remap the captured motion of the dowsing hazels movements. So Finding Centre evokes that moment when the hazel stick dips towards the earth. Sorry. So it's kind of that action of crossing the Hidden Springs Centre. So I'm trying to visually describe the tracing, the possible electromagnetic pull of the water on the body and through the hazel twig. And there is a relationship between kind of the eye, the body and the hand when this happens. The hand, the tool and the body and the drawing surface. And finally the marks on the paper. And then between the eye and the artist and what lies beyond. So again, it's about kind of that conversation with the audience about what else is possible. And really this was inspired by Deb's sense of touch and kind of performative gesture when she's kind of mapping out and revealing these underground springs. You know, it was extraordinary to witness that energy and that kind of very palpable sense that she feels when she's walking across a field. And observing how her walking body could receive and decode these forces in the landscape really shifted my understanding of my personal connection to the earth when I'm walking, but then also to my relationship with materials when I'm drawing and printing. And this kind of understanding of how the void beneath our feet influences the landscape of what was really the inspiration then behind this body of work, which was called Measuring States. So these are 3-meter hand cut panels, specifically looking at how we imagine and read a landscape through absence. So what is more important, negative or positive space? And these panels kind of invite you to move between them, to look through and beyond, and to connect with the voids, to make new connections with an abstracted view. So again, these were inspired by conversations I had with Deb and Ros about how we read our landscapes. And really over the last 2 years, this project Porosity and the body of work that has emerged, the conversations and the walking journeys with Deb and Ros have continued. New layers of seeing are informing and building the imagery that I'm creating. So understanding how my body is receiving unseen energy when walking, then thinks about the possibilities to explore how I translate my sensory response to walking in the landscape. On a recent residency in Stoke-on-Trent just last month, I had the opportunity to again work with Deb, and together we led a public walk as part of my residency. So this time we were feeling the vibrations, shifting ideas of an unseen landscape, but within an urban environment. So this was a new situation for both of us. And reminding ourselves to be still and to listen and feel the earth beneath our feet. But more importantly, to listen to buildings this time and to listen to below the streets of Stoke-on-Trent where we were walking. So conversations during the day linked very personal experiences. The group shared local knowledge, which was great, walking routes and different understanding with these new discoveries of walking followed. So we were following energy lines under the guidance of Deb, and then we were talking about it and communicating through different technologies and different apps. So I took along these digital mapping apps. So we got augmented reality tools, and we got some hydrophones, and they were allowing us to reflect on all different kinds of unseen versions of our human reality when we were walking in a space that they thought they knew really well. But we uncovered some new stuff, which was really great. And during the day, our walking bodies kind of charted our distance along a path. So we navigated this urban landscape and this urban park, guided specifically by the springs which were below us. So we found several springs, which was exciting. And by physically pacing out the distance on the ground, we were able to locate flows and springs. So understanding how the human body is receiving this unseen energy when walking really helped people to explore then how they translated their walking in a landscape they thought they knew. And this residency really continued to shift my understanding. So drawing line by line over time, temporal, fragile, instantaneous states of flux, all of these things were informing my drawing. So I was really thinking about when you're looking, you're acting, you're reacting, all of these things are happening both analytically and instinctively. And the drawing becomes the residue of these relationships, making them visible. So the final piece of work I made during my residency was very site specific and site responsive. It was a floor drawing following the line of an underground spring, which Deb located on her visit. It's a unique drawing which maps out the potential and flow of energy below the gallery floor. So it's a salt drawing which took me 10 days and was only in situ for the 2 weeks that the exhibition was open to the public. So it was impossible to view, that I wanted to deliberately make it impossible to view from just kind of one point. It demanded the viewer to kind of move around, to have a different kind of engagement with it, to be confused about what the material was. So they really got down close to kind of look at the salt. And then, to take that idea of a way of something, a memory that only exists in your mind, and the memory is enforced by how much time you choose to spend with it. And I really love that about installation work. So I'd just like to leave you really with this quote by Sharon Blackie. We are not separate from this earth, we are part of it, whether we fully feel it in our bodies yet or not. I think that kind of sums up my work at the moment. And you can read more about the project Porosity and the collaboration with Deb and Roz on my websites. There's also a publication which I had made about porosity specifically, which is available to view for free online at the address you can see on the slide. Thank you so much for listening.